The hallways of Maplewood High, a school where money and grades went hand in hand, were buzzing with the usual morning chaos. Students rushed to class, a mix of ambitious chatter and weekend gossip filling the air. Through this sea of teenagers walked Miss Angela Carter, a history teacher whose reputation was as solid as the school's foundations. She was a black woman in her late 30s, known for her sharp mind and unwavering professionalism. Her calm, graceful presence commanded a natural respect that some of the wealthier students often mistook for weakness. This morning, Ms. Carter was heading to her advanced history class, a stack of papers in her arms. She'd been at Maplewood for nearly 10 years, and she knew the student body inside and out. She knew the diligent ones, the quiet ones, and the ones who believed their family's status gave them a free pass to test every boundary. As she entered her classroom, the familiar hum of student conversation greeted her. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the neat rows of desks. She set down her materials, ready to dive into a powerful lesson on the civil rights movement, a topic she believed was crucial for fostering critical thought. But in the back corner, a small group of students from privileged families were already hatching a plan. They whispered and giggled, confident that their wealth was a shield against any real consequences. To them, Ms. Carter's quiet demeanor was an invitation for mischief. They saw her not as a respected educator, but as an easy target for a prank. Their arrogance was palpable. They believed their social standing gave them power over adults, even a teacher as composed as Ms. Carter. The class began, and Ms. Carter's calm, authoritative voice filled the room. She spoke with a passion for history that drew most students in. They took notes, asked insightful questions, and engaged in the discussion. But the pranksters couldn't resist. Their whispers grew into snickers. They made subtle, mocking gestures, commenting on everything from her accent to her movements, hoping to see her lose her cool. Ms. Carter noticed every smirk and whisper, but her composure never faltered. She had faced disrespect before and knew that maintaining her authority was key. She continued teaching, her tone steady, subtly letting the disruptive students know she was aware of their behavior. The whispers, however, got louder. One student raised his hand, not with a question, but with a sarcastic remark. Another let out a loud snicker. The atmosphere grew tense, and even the attentive students began to feel uncomfortable. The pranksters were getting bolder, mistaking Ms. Carter's calm for weakness. Yet, she remained unshaken. Her eyes scanned the room, taking a mental inventory of who was participating and who was pushing the limits. She knew that confronting them too early could escalate things, but ignoring them would be a mistake. As she moved between the desks, engaging students one-on-one, the pranksters tried to interrupt. But each attempt was met with a quiet, firm authority that left them frustrated and confused. The tension in the room was like a gathering storm. A confrontation felt inevitable, but it was clear that Ms. Carter would be the one in control. The students plotting their prank had no idea that they were about to receive the most memorable lesson of their lives, one that had nothing to do with history books, and everything to do with respect, accountability, and the unshakable power of quiet strength. The morning sun streamed through the classroom windows, highlighting the neatly stacked notebooks and polished desks. To an outsider, it looked like any other day at Maplewood High. But for Ms. Angela Carter, a veteran teacher, she could already feel the tension building. A group of prankster students, made bold by their wealth and social status, had begun to test her limits. What started as quiet whispers and subtle smirks was quickly escalating into open attempts to humiliate her. It began with small, seemingly harmless acts: a chair nudged just so as she walked by, a snicker when she explained a historical detail, and whispered jokes clearly meant to ridicule her in front of the entire class. The students assumed her calm composure was a sign of weakness. They had no idea that Ms. Carter had seen this all before, and she knew exactly how to dismantle their disrespect without ever losing her cool. One student, practically radiating arrogance, raised his hand with a smirk. "So why do we even have to learn this? It just feels like a waste of time," he asked, his voice deliberately loud, seeking an audience. A few of his friends laughed nervously, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the impending confrontation. Ms. Carter looked directly at him, her eyes calm but piercing. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air, allowing the entire room to feel the weight of her presence. "We study history," she said, her voice even and steady. Because understanding the past shapes the decisions we make today. And your disrespect won't change that. Her words were simple, but they cut through the tension like a knife. Frustrated that their first attempt hadn't provoked the reaction they wanted, the pranksters decided to escalate. Another student started mimicking her voice in an exaggerated, mocking tone. A third drew a crude cartoon on his notebook and held it up for his friends to see. A ripple of suppressed laughter spread through their corner of the room. Ms. Carter's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but her composure remained unshaken. She knew that reacting with anger would be handing them a victory, but doing nothing was just as dangerous. She needed to assert control, and she had the perfect strategy: silent authority. Her gaze swept across the classroom, locking briefly onto each of the disruptive students. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. She simply made them feel the weight of her awareness. Every smirk, every whisper, every childish attempt to embarrass her was being noticed. She continued the lesson with deliberate precision, asking pointed questions that required their full attention, subtly drawing the rest of the class into an engaging discussion. Slowly but surely, the laughter died down. They thought they could provoke her with noise and mockery, but her quiet confidence made it clear she would not be shaken. Still, the bullies weren't ready to give up. One of them, trying to be clever, leaned back in his chair and loudly remarked, "You're too serious all the time, don't you ever lighten up?" His friends chuckled, convinced he'd landed a brilliant jab. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the explosion. It never came. Ms. Carter turned slowly toward him, her expression neutral but absolutely commanding. "I take my work seriously," she said quietly, her tone firm but calm, "because every student in this room deserves respect, including you." The statement wasn't loud, but it resonated through the classroom like a quiet thunderclap, silencing even the most confident snickers. In that moment, the pranksters realized, perhaps for the first time, that their wealth and social status offered no protection from genuine accountability. Ms. Carter didn't need to shout, threaten, or argue. Her presence alone was a masterclass in authority. She continued teaching, seamlessly incorporating interactive questions and discussions that left no room for disruption. The pranksters, now embarrassed and flustered, tried to maintain their bravado, but it was clear to everyone that their little show had lost its power. By the time the bell rang for a short break, the entire atmosphere in the classroom had shifted. Students whispered among themselves, amazed at how she had handled the situation without ever raising her voice. The pranksters exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that Ms. Carter wasn't just any teacher. She was someone who commanded respect through pure intelligence, patience, and an unshakable inner strength. For Ms. Carter, this was more than just a test. It was a chance to reinforce the culture of respect she demanded in her classroom. She allowed the pranksters to stew in their own embarrassment, knowing that the lesson wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Their real reckoning was still to come, one that would teach them and the entire class a permanent lesson about the true meaning of respect. By mid-afternoon, the tension in Ms. Carter's classroom had reached a boiling point. The wealthy students who had been mocking her all morning were getting bolder, their arrogance unchecked by any sense of respect. They mistook her calm composure for weakness, believing their status would shield them from any consequences. But Ms. Carter had been patient. She'd noticed every smirk, every whispered joke, and every attempt to undermine her. She had reached her limit, and she knew it was time to act. The students were huddled near the back of the classroom, whispering and nudging each other. One of them cracked a loud joke about her lesson plan, sparking laughter from the group. A few other students, who actually valued respect, looked on uncomfortably, not sure what to do. Ms. Carter's eyes slowly scanned the room, landing on each offender with steady precision. Her voice remained calm, almost deceptively so, as she said, "I think it's time for some of you to step outside." The words hit them like a shockwave. The students froze, their faces a mix of confusion and disbelief. They had always assumed their wealth and social influence made them untouchable. They never imagined a teacher would dare discipline them so publicly. But there stood Ms. Carter, firm, her authority absolute, calmly delivering a consequence none of them saw coming. One student laughed nervously, trying to challenge her. "You can't do that," he muttered, but his voice lacked any real conviction. Ms. Carter didn't raise her voice or get into an argument. Instead, she simply gestured to the door with an air of undeniable authority. "I can and I will step outside now." Her tone left no room for negotiation. It wasn't anger. It was pure, unshakable control. As the disruptive students reluctantly gathered their things, the classroom fell completely silent. The other students watched in awe, whispering to each other about how powerful and composed she was. The prankster's laughter was gone, replaced by a stunned silence. Their overblown confidence was shattered, and for the first time the reality of accountability began to set in. Once they were gone, Ms. Carter turned to the rest of the class, her voice still steady and controlled. She didn't need to give a long speech. Her actions had already taught the most important lesson. Respect, she had just demonstrated, was non-negotiable, and privilege was not a free pass to ignore responsibility. By calmly but decisively removing the disruptive students, she had completely flipped the power dynamic. When the expelled students returned later, their faces showed a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and a newfound, reluctant respect. They had completely underestimated Ms. Carter's authority and composure, and the reality of their actions had finally hit them. The other students now saw her not just as a teacher, but as a true figure of authority and strength, someone who commanded respect with quiet, intelligent decisiveness. In that single moment, Ms. Carter taught a lesson they would never forget. True authority isn't about shouting or aggression. It's about knowledge, self-control, and the courage to enforce boundaries. The pranksters had thought they were untouchable, but her calm, decisive action proved them wrong. The entire atmosphere of the classroom had changed in an instant. The balance of respect, once tilted by arrogance, was now restored. By the end of the day, the message was crystal clear to everyone. Disrespect has consequences, and true authority, the kind earned through knowledge, patience, and unwavering confidence, is a force to be reckoned with. Ms. Carter's classroom was no longer just a place for learning subjects from a book. It was now a place where dignity, accountability, and respect were visibly enforced, leaving a lasting mark on every single person there. The classroom felt different after what happened. A day that started just like any other with textbooks and lectures had shifted into something none of us would ever forget. The troublemakers, who were usually so loud and full of themselves, were now silent. Their usual arrogance had vanished, replaced by a quiet, dawning realization of what they'd done. For the rest of us, it was a real-time lesson in accountability, respect, and the incredible power of calm authority. Ms. Carter didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to shout, make threats, or publicly shame them any more than they'd shamed themselves. Through her composed and decisive actions, she demonstrated something powerful: that real leadership doesn't come from anger or intimidation. It comes from integrity, intelligence, and a quiet, unshakable courage. The students who were sent out had to face a hard truth. They learned that their family's money and influence couldn't buy them a free pass from consequences. They discovered that showing disrespect to someone who commanded genuine respect could backfire in a very humbling way. In the days that followed, you could feel a subtle change ripple through the school. It was like everyone was a little more mindful, a little more aware of their actions. Students started treating teachers and each other with more respect. Even the pranksters, though I'm sure they were bitter at first, began to understand that there are boundaries you just don't cross. They learned about dignity and humility the hard way. Ms. Carter, of course, continued her lessons with the same grace and professionalism she always had. But now, she carried an extra layer of authority, something born from the deep admiration we all felt for her. She wasn't just our teacher anymore. She had become a symbol of integrity and quiet strength. The story of what happened in that classroom spread like wildfire. But it wasn't just gossip. It was told like an inspiring tale, a lesson for everyone. It reminded us all that true authority isn't something you can demand. It's something you earn. It showed us that courage and self-respect can command more respect than any threat ever could. Ms. Carter proved that by standing firm in your values with patience and intelligence, you can transform a moment of conflict into a moment of empowerment. By the end of that week, it was crystal clear that the prankster's moment of humiliation had become a turning point for the entire school. They learned, and we all learned, that no one, no matter their status, is above showing basic human respect. Our classroom became more than just a place for learning math or history. It became a place where we learned about life, about integrity, accountability, and what real authority looks like. Ms. Carter's calm, decisive response left a permanent mark on all of us. It's a lesson we'll carry long after we've forgotten the formulas and dates, a lesson in strength, dignity, and the incredible power of quiet confidence.